Hey, thank you all for joining the summit session in May. The topic today that we're going to speak about is how institutes are fighting back against the evolution of AI-based cheating. And I have three customers of ours who's volunteered to be the panel today, and really glad to have them. I'll just introduce them. So I'll start off with Scott. Scott is the director from SFDP Hedge. Scott, if you could just speak a bit about your role and your organization.
Sure, thank you. I'm Scott, and I work for San Francisco Department of Public Health in the Human Resources Division. And my sometimes changing title is Director of Recruitment, Assessment, and Classification, otherwise known as the Merit Division. And essentially what we're tasked with is to create employment assessments for hiring purposes. So really this is pre-employment testing. So simply put, we work with SMEs, generate an assessment, and we use that to create a short list for hiring managers to get their staff hired in a legally defensible way and hopefully add some value to it as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Scott. And then I have Claire with me. Claire is a director with Cambridge. Claire, thank you. And if you could just introduce your role and your organization.
Sure. My role is Director of Exam Services, so managing test security and operational delivery. And we specialize in English language assessments, and we deliver those in about 130 countries globally, a few million test takers each year. And some of the products are digital. Most of them are. We still have a few that are paper-based.
Okay, thank you, Claire. And then we have Laurent. Laurent is a senior program manager with DBD Labs. I've been working closely with Laurent since our journey started with DBD. So, Laurent, thank you. And if you could just introduce yourself and your organization.
Sure. So I'm Laurent Goldstein. I've been working in certification for over 10 years now. And for the last 4.5 years at DBT Labs, where I built and launched a certification program from the ground up. Prior to managing certification programs, I worked as a computer engineer and later became involved in certification development as a SME. DBT Labs is a software company focusing on analytics engineering. We help data teams transform and build trustable, well-governed, documented, and consistent data sets.
Okay, thank you so much for the introductions. I think we'll get started, I think we all know that over the years, cheating and the forms of cheating has changed. You're coming from different regions, different, organizations. And I wanted to hear from you, how are you seeing the evolution of cheating that's happening today? And probably, Scott, if you want to start off, I know you've had a lot in terms of how you look at cheating and how you analyze some of it.
Sure. I think for us, because we've really transitioned and still doing so from paper and pencil testing in person, given a lot of changes with the environment in the city, not necessarily having space to test. So we've really been on the learning path for that movement. And, within a controlled environment or setting where you are paper and pencil, the situations you work with are very different than what you're doing online. So it's been a lot of learning for us. We have a big range of candidates and expertise among those candidates. So you might not necessarily have the most technically sophisticated or not. It's very hard to tell. So for us, it's really been, anything ranging from tools and resources that seemed like, for the candidate's perspective, they wouldn't have harmed anything, but for really policies around testing in the city, there are strict guidelines that you can't use really anything assistive, whether it's Google Translate or otherwise. And so those, there's really just such a range of things that we've been learning and exploring and trying to understand. And I think it's like working through to find that right blend of security measures to also meet candidate experience so it's not arduous. Like our position is we are in a recruiting environment, so we really want our people to have a good experience from point A potentially to point B at hire. So it's making sure that we are protecting our assets being our assessments, but we're giving the candidate a reasonable experience so that they don't feel like that the second they step in, that they're just, absolute level of mistrust is already here when we want them to actually come to us and be our employee potentially.
That's so. And Claire, for you, I know y'all handle a significant volume in your line of work, right? With millions of candidates each year. So how does that percolate for you? Like, what are you seeing as trends that's emerging, which are strongly, which stand out for you?
Yeah, well, in our case, having so many test takers in so many countries does give us a huge amount of data, which is fantastic. So we are using that to track those trends. We see different kinds of cheating in different products and sometimes different countries. It depends on the age group, because we have products that are aimed at, say, teenagers at school, and others that are aimed at adults accessing immigration or accessing jobs and things like that. So we do see quite a few differences here and there. Obviously, over the last few years, we've seen more attempts at using AI to cheat on the assessments. But one of the typical things is proxies, impersonators. So that's one of the typical things we see across everything except the sort of high school based exams. We see people, having somebody take the test on their behalf or trying to.
High schools, that's interesting. Even at high schools, you're seeing that impersonation happening.
That's more like where you get your friend to take the test for you. Whereas if it's an adult taking a test for employment purposes, they might use a paid service. So they might pay a cheating organization to arrange for somebody to take the tests for them.
Yeah, that's there. And Laurent, how do you see that, Laurent, with your certification? Or what about cheating organizations that are actually helping candidates clear the certification?
Well, fortunately, so far, I haven't spotted security violation and cheating with my program, but maybe it's because I'm not aware of everything that's going on. But I only have 2 exams right now, so it's pretty easy to monitor them. But I've got an experience in the fighting fraud and the infringement, cheating, all type of things from proxy testing to harvesting content. But at DBT, I started a brand new program, so I try to really be proactive in anticipating potential threats. So but the threats, they evolve, and what has changed significantly over the past 2 years is the emergence of AI-powered bots, agents, capable of some questions. So actually, all that reinforced my decision to keep closed book exam and live proctor by a human. But one shift I think that I've seen recently is increased focus on developing exam questions that should be more difficult for AI models to answer correctly or for somebody to memorize. And so I'm developing scenario-based questions where to identify the correct answer, you need practical hands-on experience. So and that, I think, can be done without raising difficulty level of exams, just more elaborated questions.
That's great. Yeah, that's an interesting topic, right? Content, it's not only about them answering the questions and getting through, it's also about them stealing the content, right? Which makes then content management more difficult. What are the thoughts on that? Because I've seen that I mean, a lot of proctoring customers that we have, I've seen that as, where we see candidates just joining sessions just to steal content. The intent is not even to clear the certification program. So how do you think that is playing out? Scott or Claire, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to sort of step in with the Cambridge point of view, is that we So again, using our data, we track test takers. We can see who's taking the test, how often they're taking it, and some patterns do suggest that somebody might be taking it for the purposes of content harvesting. That said, it's very hard to stop all of it, and really one of the best defenses is having a really good sized item bank, so that even if you get access to a question in advance and memorize the answer, the chances of that being the test, particularly if you're taking adaptive digital tests, it's going to be very hard for you to predict which of those questions you're going to see in the test.
I think that's excellent. Like, the adaptive tests, that's also a space, right? Which helps you prevent cheating. And then the large digital bank, that's pretty significant because you can't memorize everything. I think that's the key there. Great. And I know, Scott, you spoke about, how you're doing the item analysis with your questions and answers, and that kind of helps as well in terms of giving
Correct.
insights for you to measure. So yeah, if you could speak about that, that would be great.
Yeah, so because we've had this recent transition from in person, we're able to compare the data. Sometimes it's the same test takers, sometimes it's, very similar cohorts, population sample, etc. And by and large, there hasn't been a huge deviation, at least nothing statistically significant, running a fairly simple F test and things like that across cohorts. We've also had, in our ramp up of the online testing, we've allowed option when we've been able to secure a testing space to actually mirror the testing environment from in person and online to really look at the data and say, hey, is cohort A doing better? And really nothing has come back. In terms of, I wanted to touch on what Claire was saying, in terms of the item bank stuff, that's something we're really trying to push here as well, which is to have items on rotation. And it also, sort of matches with the item analysis, is that we're able to really have a more robust group of items to swap in and out as we're going along, to make sure that, if someone's taken, this is just basic stuff for testing too, right? Recency and all that. If we have a reapplicant or whatever, even if it's outside of a year, we want to make sure that, there is new content going in front of candidates. It's modernized. If policies have changed, it's matched that, and different things like that. We have seen, simple tactics change outcomes for retesters too. Our audience is a little bit smaller, I think, so we're able to really follow people a little closer. Sometimes it's employees, sometimes it's just people who apply a lot because they want a city job. And it's miraculous what simple changes can do on someone's test score in terms of just restructuring the assessment, even with the same items. So similar to what Claire is saying, that you don't know what you're going to get, that definitely has an impact, because if someone had a key generated or whatever it was, that's useless then in the next iteration.
Yeah, that's true. And when it comes to the enhancements that you use, I know y'all are using different solutions from Talvio, right? And like Lauren, for example, has gone with live proctoring for all of his certification exams. I think one of the topics they wanted to discuss is about, how the more stringent you become with security, then we see feedback from candidates in terms of, their overall experience that they're having with the certification program, right? So if we get secure browser in, or we use our advanced AI monitoring, they have to perform these additional steps in order for them to start the examination and then go through. So how is that balance being brought in? How do you think about it? And Laurent, I know you shared your views on why you using live proctoring. So I think you can share that, because that was slightly different when I had heard it out.
Sure. Well, as I designed my program, there was never a doubt in my mind that all the exam should be delivered and proctored under rigorous security standards. I've seen too much cheating I learned from a lot of experience in cheating, so I wanted live proctoring, low candidate to proctor ratio, real-time interaction when needed, and closed book testing environment with no access to physical material and throughout the exam. I interact almost daily with candidates, and I listen to their feedback and complaints. And actually, that's enabled me to work closely with you, with Talview, to refine certain policies, to tighten some, to relax over. Many, I think that applying common sense is good when some excessive rigidity provide little additional value to exam security and candidate experience.
Great, great. And from Cambridge, what do you see the candidates giving feedback about, Claire? Like when you enhance the security, you're asking them to do more steps in onboarding. And how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think again, going to Laurence's point, it's important to put yourself in the shoes of the test taker. I've also taken lots of exams and I know how stressful it can be. So I think it's important for us to understand the experience the test taker is going through. And as much as possible, we look at how can we design what we're doing based on the feedback we get from test takers, what they're confused about, what they get wrong, what they find strange, what they think is over the top. I mean, look at it and consider, is there something we can change in how we're designing the security checks themselves? And if not, then is it more about giving them information up front of this is what to expect and this is why? Because sometimes they might look at a particular step and think, why do I have to do that? And we can give them, explanatory videos, FAQs, something like that, that explains this is what's going to happen, this is why, so that at least when it happens in the test, they're prepared and, understand what's going on.
And Scott, from your perspective, of the severity of the checks, how do you see that feedback coming along from your candidates?
I think generally speaking, we've used all different workflow models. So we've done record and review, we've done live proctoring, we had secure browser, and I think what we've landed on now is secure browser with live proctor, which sounds similar to what Laurent's using. And I think the first, like doing the secure browser, the interoperability was like the biggest kind of challenge, right? Like it is a deep level system integration. And so I think that created some frustration. The only other thing that's kind of been challenging, at least from the perspective of a candidate, is the room scanner 360, right? Like that, sometimes people react negatively to it, and it's a lot about just consistency with proctor expectations and things like that, People are really sometimes limited to the space they're taking a test in. We don't have a lot of control over it, and then there has to be a very reasonable expectation on what the setup can actually look like. I know some much more in-depth review of room space can require a lot of time, right, to move stuff around and things like that. We've been at least doing our best to keep that to reasonable. So that obviously if there was a TV or something in the background, we wouldn't tell the person to pick up the TV and move it and things like that. So it's always, again, I think the theme here is balance and, the likelihood of a problem. And I think that's the hardest thing, which is knowing what that percentage of nefarious behavior versus someone who simply just has a cluttered space and they're not doing anything, right? They're just, that's what their workspace looks like.
That's true. That's true. I think that's one of the most common feedbacks we see as well in all of our surveys, right? Where candidates are giving feedback saying that, hey, I think the onboarding, I'm not comfortable sharing my room. But then the way we see it is they are in a room which has to be monitored. And if they're uncomfortable showing that space, then they cannot be monitored, right? And I think it's that balance we have to bring about. There are some tests like Lauren spoke about open book, closed book, where you may want to look at the level of stringency you want to bring in, if it's a closed book versus open book, because you're then allowing the candidate to go. We also see tests which, where the candidates are allowed breaks. They can take breaks during that. And again, over there, when they return from breaks, like, our recommendation would be to check the room because you really won't know. And that's one of what we see as a common loophole that they use to bring someone into the room, and unsecure the room that's already been secured. So, yeah, that balance is always going to be very interesting to bring in. And I've seen that from region to region, it kind of differs as well, the way candidates' opinions changes. So yeah, that's kind of it's I manage a team of live proctors in Talview, and it's a constant evolution for us in how we handle that. Um, Coming over to AI, I know we've released a lot of great AI monitoring systems in our solutions recently. And how do you see that, assisting the way we call it, like, if we're using live proctoring today, we assist our live proctors with the AI, and we are seeing excellent results with it. The efforts or catching of cheating that we wouldn't have caught is coming up. And how do you see that? AI with human combination. Anyone, Claire, Lauren, Scott?
I want to say that AI assisted cheating, it's not going to only be an integrity problem. I think it's also going to be a validity problem. If an AI bot can pass exam, maybe the exam don't measure real competencies well. So detection and monitoring have a role, and you have implemented AI monitoring. We talked about that quite a lot. I think that these tools are improving the way we can catch a real anomaly. That's great. But I think that we need to better understand what's under the hood and evaluate the system to know if it's consistent with some industry standard or just like Tyview on AI monitoring. And I'd like to see how we can detect anomalies, but not detect too many behavior and move from the candidate that could trigger too many alerts and red flags that would not be necessarily valid. So I think it's good if we have institutes and regulators and accreditation bodies all agree on what the flag should be for the AI monitoring tools.
That's great. And Claire, we spoke about that. You were talking to me about, the rules and monitoring bodies and compliances. Could you speak something about that more in detail? I think that's interesting because even Scott comes from a different region and how he standardizes it. So yeah, would like to hear from you.
Yeah, well, we're based in the UK, and the UK government has a body called Ofqual, and Ofqual set standards for assessment organisations, and many of our products are recognised by Ofqual or regulated by Ofqual. So that means that for each of those products, each of those assessments, we have to meet the Ofqual standards and evidence how we meet them. So for example, if we use AI to help us flag issues, and it is great at consistency and great at scale and great at lots of things, we can use it to flag issues, but we don't have the AI make the decision to, for example, cancel the test, close the test. We would look for a human to review it, to take into account any context. And humans are still often better at that at the moment anyway, than AI. But also under the Ofqual regulations at the moment, we have to have it reviewed by a human. So we would use our expert humans to review things and make decisions, and then we can evidence to our regulator that we're meeting those standards. So that in our case, as I say, most of our products are regulated by Ofqual.
Thank you, Claire. And Scott, you run it differently with the regulations that you have, right? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, we the purview of our assessments fall under City and County Civil Service Commission and through our centralized Human Resources Division in City and County San Francisco. So there's a couple of layers of legislative oversight. So essentially, the provisions on cheating and all that stuff come from the civil service rules, which are broad and encompassing. It's really like anything kind of that we didn't actually specifically say that you could use could be constituting that. And it's like a broad, very broad net. In terms of the proctoring and the AI, there is other legislation in city and county that requires certain reporting of AI assisted tools or functions and software. So that particular that particular set of legislation essentially, say a proctoring tool or product that has AI assistance, we have to answer a bunch of questions and actually publicly post the nature of those interactions so that anyone could actually look and see how a system is being used or otherwise, integrated with a business service for the city department, in our case, HR and assessment. So the human in the loop has been really a standard here, and that's pretty much for any tool we have. So human in the loop proctoring, 100%. I think the difficulty on it is if there's a flag or anything like that, if for whatever reason someone comes back and doesn't agree with it, they have the ability to appeal. So I don't know if anyone else has that in terms of their legislative purview, but if someone doesn't like that we rejected them or they got disqualified from assessment, they could appeal to that Civil Service Commission. We have presented a couple of times there for making decisions, mainly with record and review workflow because we caught it after the fact. But that is sort of their final out. So it's not only is it human in the loop on decisions, but there's actually a final regulatory body that people could interact with if they wanted to.
Great. Yeah, and Lauren, that kind of resonates with you, I think, with what you're doing. When you have a forum where, you're allowing the candidates to share their feedback or struggles, you're monitoring that. And, when they raise the concerns, I think you are controlling today that regulation, right? Which is very similar to what you heard Claire and Scott speak about, that, if they challenge it, then we are actually reviewing that in detail, and then deciding, what's best for the candidate at that point. Like I think some of the, you work out that voucher-based system that you have, and in that kind of regulates, I think what Scott spoke about, that if it is you're allowing the candidates to actually raise their concern and then we're reviewing it.
Right, and I think that we owe that to the candidate. Some complaints have merits, some don't have any, but usually we get complaints from people who don't succeed with the certification, not people who pass. But we have to look at that because no system is perfect. What's great is that when we talked about all the flags, but I see that exam security starting when a candidate joins a session, but it doesn't end when they click submit and they get their score. We've got all the post-exam analysis that could provide some powerful additional safeguard. We can compare individual performance against broader candidates' friends. We can look at performance at the item level. We've got all these stats, so we can also get an idea if the candidate performance raises any flag from a stats perspective. So I'm not going to go into details, but I usually look at the individual performance at the item level, and sometimes it reveals some valuable clues about whether an overall exam performance is consistent and legitimate. And I reach out to you, of course, because I want to make sure that I know exactly what's happening from a proctoring perspective. But from a scoring perspective, I already have an idea if there's anything that's unusual. Obviously, if a candidate misses the cut score by a big margin, nothing is going to change. but I'm interested to see how long the candidates spend in completing the exam, and how long for some specific questions and things like that. And fortunately, I didn't run into issues where there was cheating that's obvious. But I think it's very important that we work together, we collaborate, and I share this candidate experience, because sometimes it's very legit and something was wrong, and we don't want any issues to spiral out of controls and go viral on the internet with somebody sharing some complaints and saying, hey, don't go with TalView and with DBT exam, because you're going to have a poor experience. So I think it's very important to be reactive, and not just to assume that candidates, just because they fail the exam, they're going to make up any type of complaint.
Thank you. And how does the future look like? You'll have all been part of the evolution, and it's rapidly evolving, right? So, Claire, if you could share something about how do you think that, this is evolving? What kind of, the platform in itself which you're using today, the solution that you're using, what are the things that you think would be good to have and for us to combat this in the future?
Yeah, well, in our case, we're always looking at not just how are people cheating today, but how are they going to cheat tomorrow? So we look across our assessment, and it's not just about the test day, it's the whole end to end, beginning to end. We have to look at all of the steps and consider, are there any vulnerabilities there? Are there new ways of using AI to cheat that we haven't got a mitigation for example? And so we look at each step of the process and think, is there a vulnerability here? Is there a way of committing malpractice? What do we need to put in place? And then if there's something, for example, within the proctoring tool that we think is needed, we would be talking to TalView about it. What we really need, of course, and this is where there's a bit of a challenge sometimes between us and, say, cheating organizations, is if we want to introduce a change, working with you on introducing a change to something, we want it to be evidence that it works. We want to be sure it's not accidentally introducing other mistakes or other errors. We want to make sure it works, and we want to make sure it's legal. We can use it in each of the countries, for example. Cheating organizations don't have to operate within the law, so sometimes they have a bit more scope than us. But really, we're continually looking at what has changed. Are there new ways of using AI or other methods to cheat, and have we got all of the mitigations in place that are needed? I think test security is one of those things that's never finished. We always have to keep an eye on it and look at, well, what's changing, what's new, what do we need to do?
That's so true. Yeah, that's never finished. That's true. It's constantly there. And Scott, what about, how do you share that opinion?
I think just, very, honestly, with our organization, it's really, we're in kind of the learning phase. So because our transition's been so recent, we don't really know the landscape as well in terms of what people are doing. Now, I think the audience is narrow in that it's sort of a localized, employer base, right? But that doesn't mean all of these things that are out there are potentially already in play, whether or not we know. So I think it's sort of a practical approach to seeing where we need to go, making sure that we're continuing to meet our needs to actually employ, but also protecting how people get there, because obviously we don't want to have a candidate pool of folks that did something they shouldn't have to get where they got. It's a not, it impacts other candidates, obviously, and it certainly impacts the hiring manager. We have had some situations where someone's gotten through an assessment and the hiring manager on the other side has been like, how did this happen? Right? We don't think and this is even in person, we had a situation where it was essentially, there's no way this person took the assessment they said, an in-person proxy per se. So, I think with at least the proctoring we're doing and the security that we're trying to implement, we're a step forward than, say, others in the public employment testing space. But I think we do have a lot to learn, and I'm glad to see colleagues on the call that have had a lot more robust sort of exposure to not just a local audience but international, and kind of seeing how that is, because it goes without saying. I mean, those uh, organizations out there, they exist, they're robust, they're sophisticated, they are lucrative, they make a lot of money doing what they do. And, I think the difference here is that simply passing the assessment doesn't really get you the job. It gets you on what we call an eligible list, but the interview part and all the other things are often in person, or on, sometimes on Teams. And we know that the interview support AI tools are out and robust, and they're just as crazy as anything to do an assessment. But there's so many layers of vetting that happen. So, we do think that at some point, someone would shake out, but that doesn't mean to say that we're foolproof. It's just there's a lot of other layers of things that happen before someone actually becomes an employee.
Yeah, that's true, Scott. I think you spoke right. There are so many layers that need to be tackled. I think that's what even Claire was saying that when she spoke about. And Lauren, what about you from your standpoint? How do you think that are there things that you see that we should look at from our tools to counter this? I know you're very hands-on when it comes to looking at every minute detail in the entire journey. So yeah.
Well, um, I rely a lot on you to make sure that you're not gonna let a cheater see our exam and complete our exam. So obviously, since we don't do the proctoring and you do, it's a lot that's on you. We trust you to not let cheaters. So I'm always concerned with like remote connection to a computer. It's not only proxy testing, but there's so many things. But again, the fact that it's closed book in a clear room with looking straight to the screen, I think I'm safe, or maybe I'm naive, but I think it's, and I said that before, but whatever we do, we mustn't implement something that's going to impact the customer experience. So while majority of candidates are honest, they simply want to demonstrate their skills and knowledge, and and take an exam in an unobtrusive way, and earn the credential. I don't want to be too focused on what could go wrong, because I don't have any control over that. You do. So it's much on you to talk about new trends and what some candidates have done, not necessarily with our program, but with others that we can stop, that we don't want them to bring to our program. I think a challenge is that if you see a trend, if you see something and you want to implement a solution, by the time it's implemented, tested, and live, there might be another threat coming. So we've got to always look at what's coming, but obviously it's taking a lot of time to develop solution. And I've done that before. I developed a solution that I think worked, but it takes a long time. So it's a big investment. So we have to really not stick to one solution, but be open to what's out there.
True. Yeah, I think thank you, Laurent. You put me in the hot seat there. But yeah, that's true. So that's something that we do consistently at Talview, right? We're capturing all of the feedback. We have different regions, candidates, we know different cheating organizations that are there. And we're evolving our product with that feedback, right? And we look at different ways that someone tried to cheat and think of different, what could they do further to use certain technology. Like, for example, camera-based spectacles is a big thing today, right? You have a lot of it started off with Meta, and now we have a lot of other brands that have picked up. So that's an evolution which is which can there, and how we detect that, and then that loop is consistently improving our product. Our product managers conduct a lot of research in the market to enhance the product so that we stay ahead of the curve, and that's how we build the entire portfolio. But yeah, there is a lot that needs to be done, and I think every small feedback that we take and we are able to, share that across. I think, I'm not sure if you'll all seen that, but we have like an SOP that we follow, and we constantly improve that SOP in terms of how proctoring is delivered to all of our candidates. And the goal is to prevent, like Lauren said, is to prevent someone who's cheating and make sure that, someone who's actually genuine is getting through without much conflict. Well, that brings us towards the end of our meet. I just wanted to thank you all. And if there's anything that you would like to add to the topic that we had, that would be great. Scott, Claire,
Thank you for this
Lauren.
conversation. No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time, taking out the time and, sharing your thoughts. I've learned a lot from this conversation. And, I'll definitely look at how I can implement some of that in our daily operations and also, share some feedback with our product team as well for this. Thank you so much. And yeah, Claire, thank you for staying back late. I know from a time zone, it's quite a shift for all of us. So really appreciate it. And Laurent and Scott had to wake up early today, so appreciate that.
That's all right. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.